A freight forwarder in Belgium quoted a client $4,200 for a container from Shanghai to Antwerp. The invoice that arrived was $8,100. The forwarder didn't make a mistake. The booking was correct. The cargo was moved and the ship arrived. 3 separate charges accumulated during that shipment, and none of them were visible until the invoice landed. Demurrage, war risk, carbon. 3 line items, 3 different rules, and 1 very unhappy client. That's what we're getting into today. Welcome to the Dockflow Dispatch. I'm Pauline van Michiel, co-founder of Dockflow.
And I'm Michiel Gabriels. I'm the SDR at Dockflow, and I talk to freight forwarders every single day.
Today, we're looking at what I'd call the hidden invoice problem. Freight forwarders are being hit by 3 separate cost layers. They can't see them coming, and they can't explain why until they arrive.
And the timing isn't a coincidence. We're in 2026. The EU ETS just moved to full 100% compliance. The Strait of Hormuz is escalating, and the carriers raised demurrage tariffs in January. All 3 at once.
We're going to break each one down, where it comes from, why it's invisible, and what you can do about it.
We spent time digging into this. Let's get into it. Let's start with the basic. These 3 charges all exist, but I don't think most forwarders understand how they stack or how they're arriving together.
And we're not being just theoretical here. They are showing up on invoices every week.
Yeah, so let's start with demurrage. In plain terms, it's what you pay when a container sits at a port terminal past the allowed free time. The carrier gives you a window, usually 3 to 5 days, and you can pick up the container after it's available. If you don't move it in time, the clock starts. You get billed for every day it sits.
How much are we usually talking?
So right now, globally, the average is $150 to $300 per container per day. That went up 12 to 18% in 2025 compared to the year before. And starting January 2026, major carriers raised their tariffs again across all US locations.
So a 5-day delay could run from $750 to $1,500, just like that.
And detention on the other side. That's when the container has left the terminal, it's at the warehouse, but hasn't yet been returned to the carrier within the free time. Same daily charges, $100 to $250 per day.
And neither charge is visible when the shipment is moving.
Right, they show up after on the invoice.
Okay. War risk, because this feels very live right now.
It is. Most people remember the Red Sea crisis, ships rerouting around the Cape, and transit times up 10 to 14 days. Rates spiking, that situation hasn't resolved. And now we have a second disruption. The Strait of Hormuz is still escalating. The carrier response was immediate.
How immediate?
So Hapag-Lloyd introduced a war risk surcharge of $1,500 per TEU for standard dry containers and $3,500 per container for reefers and special equipment. CMA CGM added an emergency conflict surcharge of $2,000 per 20-foot dry container, and MSC added $800 on affected lanes.
So on a standard 40-footer, we're talking $3,000 from, for example, Hapag-Lloyd just for the war risk piece before anything else.
Yeah, and the container diversion in the Hormuz-region jumped 360% in under 2 weeks. That's not a slow-moving trend. That's overnight.
And the surcharge can be added mid-voyage after you've already confirmed the booking.
And that is exactly what catches forwarders out. Yes, carriers have the contractual rights to apply war risk surcharges to shipments already booked at a different rate. You find out when the invoice arrives.
Okay. Let's do carbon, because I think this one has been building for a couple of years, and yet a lot of forwarders still don't fully understand it.
So the EU emissions trading system, the EU ETS, is a carbon pricing mechanism extended to maritime shipping starting in 2024. It was phased in. So in 2024, it was 40% of verified CO2 emissions on EU touching routes had to be covered. In 2025, it went up to 70%. Starting January 2026, full coverage 100%. In 2026, it also covers methane and nitrous oxide for the first time.
And that's not partial anymore, that's a full obligation.
And carriers are passing this cost directly to shippers and forwarders as a line item on every invoice touching an EU port.
And here's the thing. So I've checked, and the surcharge amounts are completely inconsistent.
That's the most frustrating part. So Maersk is charging approximately $81 per FEU on some routes, CMA CGM around $43 per TEU, and then Hapag-Lloyd as low as $9 per TEU. Same EU ETS obligation, different carriers, wildly different numbers.
It's €9 to €81. That's 9 times the difference. So for the same regulatory requirement.
And then the fuel EU maritime on top. That came into force in January 2025. It says GHG intensity targets for vessels. Miss the target and the penalty is $2,400 per ton of VLSFO equivalent deficit. That gets passed through shippers as well.
And pass through, by that you mean the carrier calculates it, right? They calculate it, add it to the invoice, and then send it to you. So you're paying the carrier's carbon penalty.
And if they also miss the EU ETS allowance surrender deadline, September 30th, the EU adds $100 per ton CO2 on top of that, also passed through.
So we have 3 separate charge categories. Demurrage, which is a port timing penalty. War risk, that's a geopolitical surcharge added mid-transit. All 3 invisible until the invoice arrives.
According to Dock Shipper and Sea Routes, the 2026 EU ETS compliance jump alone represents an 8 to 12% increase in total freight costs on Europe-Asia and Europe-North America lanes.
Before war risk, before demurrage, just the carbon step change.
So if you quoted a client in Q4 2025, that quote is already wrong.
Let's talk about why this is a forwarder's commercial problem, not just a finance problem.
Right, because what I hear from forwarders every day is this becomes a client trust issue. You gave someone a price, the invoice doesn't match, and you're the one on the phone explaining it.
Let me walk through how it actually plays out. A forwarder books a shipment, Shanghai to Antwerp, for example. The quote includes base freight, a BAF adjustment, and port handling. The client approves, the shipment moves. During transit, the carrier adds war risk surcharge. The Hormuz situation has escalated, and the carrier applies it across all affected region bookings.
And meanwhile, the container arrives at Antwerp. The client isn't ready to pick up. Maybe they're waiting for a customs document. And the container sits 6 days past the free time window.
And the EU ETS surcharge gets calculated and added at invoice generation, 3 weeks after the shipment closed.
So the invoice shows the agreed freight rate plus a $1,500 war risk surcharge the client didn't know about, plus $1,200 in demurrage for 6 days at Antwerp, plus $81 per FEU for the EU ETS carbon fee.
And none of it was visible during the shipment. All of it lands at once.
And here's the part that really matters. There's a 30-day dispute window for demurrage charges. The FMC rules requires carriers to issue D&D invoices within 30 days of charges being incurred. And forwarders have 30 days to dispute.
But you can only dispute if you know that the charge was incurred. So if you don't have real-time visibility on container dwell time, you'll find out when the invoice arrives, at which point the dispute window may have already started.
And the billing transparency rules are still in force. The FMC requires carriers to include the container number, the billing start date, the applicable tariff, and the free time period on every demurrage invoice. If anything is missing, you can dispute the entire charge.
But most forwarders don't check. They see a charge, they pay it, they move on.
Because it's easier than fighting it.
Exactly. And for war risk, carriers are not obligated to notify you before adding a surcharge to an in-progress shipment. So you find out when the invoice lands.
And the EU ETS piece has its own transparency problem. Xenida published research flagging significant concerns about carriers overcharging. The surcharge methodology isn't standardized. Carriers have discretion on how they calculate it.
The combined picture is 3 separate charge categories, no standardized visibility mechanism for any of them, and no notification obligation on war risk. So a dispute window that starts before you know it's running. And then a carbon surcharge methodology that varies by a factor of 9.
And 8 to 12% total freight cost increase on major Europe lanes before we layer on war risk and demurrage.
Most clients don't know that number. The forwarder is expected to explain it.
Which is actually an opportunity, not just a problem.
Right. So the forwarder who proactively tells a client, hey, here's what's changing in 2026, here's how it affects your cost structure, and here's what I'm tracking on your behalf. That is the forwarder who builds trust. They become the expert. They're the one who prevents surprises.
Versus the forwarder who explains the invoice after it arrives.
One of those conversations builds the relationship and the other strains it.
But now what? We have some practical steps. What do forwarders actually do?
Yeah, there's 5 things. Let's go through them. First, recheck your EU ETS quotes for Q1 2026. If you built client quotes in Q4 2025, you were using 70% compliance costs as your baseline. That number is now 100%. So the actual delta still depends on the carrier, but it's real. So contact each carrier you book with, ask for their current ETS surcharge per TEU and per FEU, get it in writing, update your quotes.
And the variance matters commercially. If Maersk is charging $81 and Hapag-Lloyd is charging $9 on the same routes, for high volume clients, that difference is worth paying attention to when you select a carrier.
So the carbon fee is now a commercial differentiator. That's new. Okay, second, add war risk language to your client confirmations. Today, any booking that touches a flagged region, Hormuz, Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, your confirmation should include a clear line. That is that war risk surcharges may be applied to by the carrier after booking, in line with current market conditions. Get the client to acknowledge it.
It, of course, doesn't prevent the charge, but it prevents the surprise, which is most of the problem.
Exactly. It's the difference between a client who feels warned and a client who feels blindsided. Third, stop managing demurrage reactively. So the 30-day dispute window actually starts from when the charges are incurred and not from when the invoice arrives. The clock is running before you know. And the only way to dispute effectively is to know in real time when a container has entered the free time countdown.
And most forwarders don't have that visibility. They're calling the port, waiting for a reply. The container's been sitting for a week before anyone knows.
Proactive D&D planning actually can cut costs by 30 to 50%, and that's data from multiple industry sources. So the difference between knowing on day 2 versus day 6, that's the difference between acting and absorbing a $1,200 charge.
So the question for every forwarder is, what does your container visibility actually look right now? Do you know where your containers are? Do you know which ones are running down their free time?
Fourth, demand line item breakdowns on every invoice. The FMC billing rules require carriers to itemize every demurrage charge: container number, billing start date, applicable tariff, free time period. If any of that is missing, you can dispute the entire charge.
And in practice, a lot of invoices arrive incomplete. Carriers know that most forwarders just don't check.
So check. It's 5 minutes, and the same logic applies to EU ETS surcharges. So ask the carrier to provide the underlying calculation. What emissions figure did they use and what carbon price did they apply?
Most carriers will respond, and asking the question creates accountability.
And fifth, the strategic one. Build the surcharge conversation into your sales process, not as a fine print, but as a feature. So the freight forwarder who tells a prospect at the first meeting, hey, here's how we manage all these 3 layers of add-on charges that are active in the market right now. that forwarder is positioning themselves as a partner, not just a rate provider.
The customer doesn't want to read this in some fine print. They want to hear it from you personally.
The market is getting more complex, and the forwarder who manages that complexity for their clients is a lot more valuable, not less.
That's actually the strongest argument we've made for the human forwarder in a while.
That's right, and it didn't take long to find it. Let's wrap up. 3 things to take away. 1. Demurrage, war risk, and carbon fees are 3 separate charge categories. They're all active right now, and they're all pretty much invisible until the invoice arrives. And this is the hidden invoice problem. It's not hypothetical.
Second, we have the lack of real-time visibility is costing money. D&D disputes have a 30-day window, war risk gets added mid-voyage, and the EU ETS surcharges are inconsistent across carriers. If you can't see what's happening during the shipment, you can't respond.
And 3, there's a commercial opportunity here. The forwarder who tracks these charges in real time, who explains them proactively, who protects clients from surprises, that's the forwarder who builds trust, and that's where the relationship lives.
If you've got a topic you want us to dig into, reach out on LinkedIn.
And if you're dealing with charge disputes that you're not sure how to handle or an invoice that doesn't look right, reach out. That's the kind of conversation we're happy to have.
Thanks for listening to the Dockflow Dispatch.
See you next time.